put a lot of thought into the structure of your learning program, and I'm very flattered to be following Zach. He's like a perfect person to talk to about making good island wines. I love Alderley's wines. And Lamont as well. As I ask Lamont questions about Vancouver Island climate. He is the go-to resource, and obviously has just been doing it for decades as well. Alan speaks very highly of you all, and when I came on, I only started with Scott Labs in January as Alan prepared to retire. He made it very clear that I was to look after his friends. So when Ken reached out and called, I said, "Oh, I've been expecting a call from you." Nevertheless, thank you very much for inviting me into your home. I was tasked with discussing how to make aromatic and flavorful white wine. I am Maddie. I am from Ontario originally. I studied at Brock University and did their cool climate enology and viticulture program. Graduated from that back in 2010, where I also met my fella who is in the wine industry. So I am not an islander, but I think of myself as an islander by proxy because he is a Campbell River boy and he is now the chief winemaker up at Mission Hill. So we've been on this 15-year wine adventure together. It's been wonderful. After Brock, I traveled around doing vintages all over Niagara, Prince Edward County, as well as Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, South Africa, finally landing out here in BC. I was on a few different winemaking teams over the last 10 years in the Okanagan, but most recently I was at Mission Hill for the past 5 years. And then Taylor and I welcomed our little guy, Angus, back in May 2020. And there's just not enough childcare in the world for both of us to work harvest hours. So I was presented with an opportunity to move into sort of a technical support and technical sales role for Scott Labs' direct competitor, CellarTech. And then had a wonderful experience there. But when Alan decided he was going to retire, he kind of threw my hat in the ring for me and said he'd like me to be his replacement. So he's left some very big shoes to fill. And I definitely appreciate all of your patience, but it really is an honor to get to come down here and meet all of you. I've given everybody a handout, and even though the first few pages are just some of the style guides that you can find on the Scott Labs website, what I really wanted to do was focus a lot on the fruit processing and fermentation side of aromatic white winemaking, just because that's where most of the magic happens. For aromatic white winemaking, all of the heavy lifting and the decision making is really front end loaded. And then after fermentation, it's all about protecting those aromatics, minimizing handling and oxidation. So the majority of our talk is going to focus on fruit processing and fermenting. In terms of fining, after fermentation, you kind of have the luxury of time. So less of an urgent decision-making schedule and more of a, what am I tasting? What do I want to play with? What might help? So we can always talk about that in another talk. And then for stabilization, I mean, protein stability and cold stability could be topics on their own. For aromatic white wines, it's fairly straightforward. You're going to need to use bentonite. You might need to use more than you would for other white wine varieties. And then cold stabilization is pretty straightforward as well. The format of tonight's talk, I actually wanted to start by walking through this list of questions, critical questions for harvest planning and processing aromatic white wines. This is my Bible. This was the cheat sheet I made myself 10 years ago when I was moving out of like an assistant winemaker role and into a winemaker role and realized, oh my gosh, nobody's telling me what to do. I need to do all of the planning. And wine, as you know, is the result of 100 decisions, even if the decision is just to do nothing. So in talking with Ken, how do we take our aromatic white wine making to the next level? I don't think the answer is just to follow Scott Labs' recipe or recommendations. I think what I'd really like to do is empower you to really think about your winemaking decisions and try something different, hopefully something better, and continue just to grow and understand and know that you are in control. And it's not about add this much of this thing at this time. I think understanding the rationale of, well, why would we consider adding it? Or even using it as a checklist. Because every year at harvest, I have to shake the cobwebs out. I'm like, oh, right, what do I need to think about? I was like, oh yeah, did I want to add enzymes at picking? Like I should see what enzymes I might want to add. So it's broken into a few different sections, starting from before the grapes even arrive. I think good winemaking is sort of having best laid plans and then being very, very flexible and responsive based on what you're smelling and tasting, and not just making it by the numbers and not just following a recipe. So before the fruit arrives, obviously you need to have an idea of the basics. When is your potential harvest date? What tonnage are you expecting? And is it going to be machine picked or hand harvested? Just because those may influence your fruit quality. Something that's machine harvested, maybe you're going to want to get some KMS into the picking bins just because it's so juicy and you don't want there to be any opportunistic yeast or bacteria that might start to generate some VA for you. If it's hand harvested, you don't have to worry about that. You just have nice whole intact berries. Particularly for aromatic white wines, start thinking about skin contact. Do you want there to be some skin contact? Do you want to crush your Riesling grapes, leave them in a bin or a bucket with stems for 12 hours and let them really get some of those phenolics out of the skins and aromatics? Or do you want to put them into your press and just hold on to them? Hold them in the press cold, maybe with some dry ice, maybe with some enzyme? Or are there some quality concerns? Are you thinking maybe we just need to get this juice through the press, or it's already arrived from juice and we just need to start clarifying it and get our yeast in? Some of these are for a larger scale operation, such as what press will you use, what press cycle will you use. But depending on, especially if you're getting your fruit from the island, there are questions worth having an idea of before the week of harvest, just so that you've got everything clean, operating, and ready to go. First thing to think about in terms of additions is, are you going to want to add anything to the fruit, either to protect the quality that's there or to enhance the quality that's there? So are you going to add any KMS to prevent oxidation or to prevent any pathogenic activity? Are you going to want to add any enzymes, particularly for aromatic white varieties, where you do want to maybe enhance the extraction of all of those gorgeous terpenes that are sitting in the skin? And then if there's any botrytis or rot, you might also want to think about, do we need to add any sort of sacrificial tannin, some chestnut gall tannin, to inhibit the lactase activity of botrytis and prevent some enzymatic oxidation? And then depending on what you choose to add to your picking bins, you may or may not need to add them instead at the press pan. So if you've already added KMS to your fruit, if it's machine harvested, you don't need to add it again at the press pan. If you haven't added any, I'd encourage you to get some in. The sooner the better. Enzymes for aromatic white wines are particularly powerful tools. And what I love about enzymes in white winemaking is it's not subtractive. You're not finding anything out. You're not adding tannin or adding acid. You're just helping the yeast better access all of the flavors and aromas that are in your gorgeous island fruit. So I think they help you to really unlock the full potential of your island fruit that you've worked so hard to grow and source. So it's nice to maximize what's there. The other thing to think about is the role temperature can play. So for your juice, are you going to settle it with some chilling? Like, what is your chilling capacity? How long do you think it might take? These are just all the things to start thinking about so that you have a loose timeline and you have everything you need on hand and ready to go. There's some basic sanitation stuff that I won't bore you with. And the last question before the fruit arrives is, if you are thinking about adding ingredients, whether it's KMS, whether it's acid, whether it's enzyme, do you have them on hand and in the correct quantities? And that's the rationale behind knowing how many tons approximately are you going to get. We do get a lot of last minute orders. We do rush deliver them, but I would love to spare you the panicked phone calls of, do you have this in stock and how soon can you ship it? Like, oh, when do you need it? Like, the fruit's already here. I'm like, oh my goodness, okay. Once the fruit arrives, it's time to revise all those plans that you just made, because now the fruit's in front of you and you can smell it and taste it and actually assess the quality for yourself. So confirm your tonnage is expected. Make sure that your carboys or tanks or whatever fermentation vessels you're using are going to accommodate the volume. Nobody likes surprises. I've had to do some very creative pressing and premature blending to make things fit. So it's always nice just to confirm, like, yep, before I start putting this juice in that tank, it is all going to fit. How is the fruit quality? Do you see any rot? Do you smell any botrytis? Is there any mold? You might want to think about increasing a KMS addition to the juice if that's the case, just to help knock it back a little bit. And then based on juice quality, are any fining agents required? I don't love fining aromatic white wine varieties, so the Sauvignon Blancs, the Riesling, the Gewürztraminers, the Bacchus, the Ortegas, just because even if you're using a fining agent that's going to try and target some phenolics, you do strip out flavors and aromatics, no matter how light-handed you try to be. So if you are going to find something, always better to find it as a juice than as a finished wine, particularly with aromatic whites, because a lot of those aromatic precursors are either bound to sugars or are only converted to a volatile or aromatic form by a yeast's enzymatic activity. So your fining agents can't necessarily access them and pull them out as collateral damage. So talking about juice fining for aromatic white wine varieties, my head goes to managing phenolics. So things you might want to think about, or that you could just trial on the bench top once you have a juice sample. You could trial a little bit of skim milk powder or PVPP. If you don't want to use microplastics, there's chitosan-based fining agents now that are vegan and microplastic free. So they're derived from Aspergillus niger, and they're fungal in origin. And not only do they target phenolics really well, they also help clarify and settle out really quickly too. So I did bring a few samples of some of the things I'm talking about, just so when it comes time to play with juices or wines on the bench, you can see for yourself. Um, doo, 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 doo. The last thing to think about, it is a type of fining, but it's not anything that you need to purchase, is if you're dealing with any pressings. And I imagine that if you're getting premium Vancouver Island fruit, you'd want to maximize your yield and not only work with the free run. You can treat your pressings and make them very usable and very blendable without them being super phenolic or rustic. And one of the ways you can do that is with oxygen. So you can even get an aquarium bubbler or just put a T-piece on your hoses and with a valve, and crack the valve open a little bit so that you have a venturi system and can suck air in as you're moving that juice. And by getting some oxygen into the pressings early, you actually hyperoxidize them. It changes the phenolics, causes them to polymerize prematurely, and they can be fined out or they drop out of solution. And once they've been oxidized, they can't oxidize again. So not only are you protecting your pressings against browning, the juice will go super dark. Don't freak out. It's going to brighten right back up during fermentation. You're also resolving a lot of the bitterness without adding anything to your wine. So if you have some pressings lying around, it's a pretty neat thing to play with. The last thing to think about for processing your aromatic whites, even though yeast need a healthy amount of oxygen to flourish, for aromatic juices, I do encourage you to consider using dry ice. Keeping the headspace dry iced until fermentation kicks off and the yeast are producing their own CO2. It's just, again, going to help protect some of the aromatics there and prevent some premature oxidation. So once you've got your juice into your, maybe not your fermentation vessel, but sort of your settling or clarifying vessel, think about if you're just going to put it in cold storage, and just be mindful of maintaining a proper temperature so that you can be in control of when it starts fermenting and it's not kicking off on its own. Then comes what I think is one of the most important parts of winemaking. And when I was working in Burgundy, I did a vintage at Domaine Etienne Sauzet, and they work with like Grand Cru and Premier Cru fruit, like the most beautiful fruit I've ever seen. I was there as a lowly cellar hand, and I remember filling a French oak barrel with Grand Cru juice and asking my boss, how much is this worth? And he said, 60,000 euros just as juice. So don't spill. All of that story, that is to provide context for the fact that the one job that only the winemaker was allowed to do there, the son-in-law of the like 8th generation owner, was racking. Because racking is the most critical part where you can shape the entire aromatic profile of your wine, depending on how many solids you take. So for an aromatic white wine, you want to settle it pretty cleanly, pretty brightly, but you need to have some solids just to give the yeast some substrate and some of the micronutrients they need. But you don't want too many solids because increased turbidity is going to encourage sulfide off aromas. It's going to push things down a really reductive pathway. So there are some NTU guidelines on the style guides. And it's really neat. They break them out sort of by aromatic profiles that you might be pursuing. I'm taking that with a bit of a grain of salt. Like, I truthfully cannot tell you why targeting 60 to 100 NTUs will push more of a yellow and white fruit profile, but somehow targeting 80 to 120 NTUs will push more of a floral profile. I mean, if you end up doing 80 in either case, you'd be in each category. But it does help illustrate that turbidity will impact your final wine aroma profile.
What that acronym stands for and how you measure
for it? NTU, yeah. Sure. So, oh gosh. NTU, it stands for like nephelometer turbidity unit, and it's just a measure of clarity. And so the way we would measure that clarity at a winery would actually be to take a sample of the juice, and it's in a little glass vial, and you just put in a tiny little spectrophotometer, passes light through it, and tells you basically how easily the light goes through it and gives you a measure of turbidity. That's a really fancy way to do it. You don't need that though. You can just Google turbidity visual guide and click on images in Google image search, and you'll see a few different examples from juice to even just lake water, and it'll give you a feel for what level of cloudiness corresponds to what number. So I was actually doing that on the ferry, thinking like, oh, there used to be some really handy cheat sheets of just visually, I could hold it up to my juice and be like, yeah, that's about 80. So.
And is that solids or is it proteins at this point? It's probably just solids, right?
It's not just soluble solids, so the turbidity isn't necessarily going to be reflected in your bricks. It's a combination of proteins, of pulp, of.
This is early. You're still talking.
Correct. This is like your juice has just arrived, or once you've settled it for a day or two. Take all of your clear juice off of the top, rack all the clear juice, and then target taking just sort of the fluffies, we call them, the light fluffy leaves, just to give the yeast something to grab onto, but leave all of the heavy sludge. So once you get your fluffy leaves into your fermentation vessel with your clean juice, that's when you could use your guide to see, okay, where am I shaking out at? And if it's still looking pretty clear, I would encourage you to maybe add a little bit more lees, or I guess juice lees we actually call bourbs. Add a little more bourbs back to your fermentation vessel. Over clarified juice, similar to very, very turbid or murky juice, will both make your ferments really, really stinky, which for aromatic variety that we're trying to showcase all of these gorgeous floral or orchard fruit aromas, it's not what we want. That sort of answer your question?
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, all about interventions that are not just adding a silver bullet ingredient. You can work with air, you can work with the solids that are naturally present in your juice and have a huge impact on your final product. And in fact, that's how I think the best wines are made, are the ones that really maximize the potentials that are there and aren't necessarily something that we're sculpted because we added all of these tannins, or finessed because we actually find it with this to soften it. It's handling the fruits thoughtfully up front and doing it sort of as naturally as possible. Um, the other thing I would encourage you to do, if you're not already doing it, would be to get that baseline analysis of your juice. So after you've settled it, you're happy with where the clarity is landed, but before you add your yeast, it's worth grabbing a sample and just checking the Brix on it. And if you have access to checking the pH or the titratable acidity, it'll be really handy for A, ensuring microbial stability down the line, and B, not that we're going to do winemaking by the numbers, but it will help you approach the wine with some balance. So, obviously your palate is the best guide, and if you taste the juice and it's really, really acidic, even though it's juice, so it's got 250, 300 grams per liter of sugar in it, but it's still tasting acidic, having those analytical numbers saying, oh man, that pH is 2.9, that's going to be helpful because you're going to need to consider that when you're choosing a yeast to ferment it. Similarly, if the sugar is really high, you're going to want to choose something that can either handle high alcohols or is a little bit more robust. So having those initial numbers removes a lot of guesswork down the line. And worst case scenarios, if things go off the rails, it really helps, if you give me a call like, Maddie, like I'm smelling this, I don't know what's happening. Like the NTU was perfect, the juice, like the fruit was pristine. Why does it smell like this? And if I'm not there to smell with you, then the numbers are really a way for the wine or juice to talk to you or talk to me and give some insight into what might be happening. So I might say, oh, what were the acids like? And you say, well, my pH was 2.99 and my TA was 12. And I'm like, okay, and what yeast did you use? And you say, oh, I used Vin 13. And I'm like, ooh, that might be part of the problem. Even if you have the perfect amount of nutrient, that yeast is just really going to struggle at that pH level. So it just helps give you all of the context you need to choose the right yeast, choose the right fermentation temperature, and just ensure its success. And then if you're feeling really fancy, you can get the nitrogen content analyzed. But in general, Vancouver Island fruit has pretty healthy yans. You've got a gorgeous growing climate, really, really healthy soils. It's very different to growing in the sand in the Okanagan, where like one of the vineyards I actually called Starving Sands because the yans on some of the fruit that I would deal with would be like 40. So even before I'm looking at yeast or fermentation temp, I'm like, I need to put in 200 parts of fermented K, like right away with my gopher, just to even give these yeast a chance. So yeah, having our yan analysis would be critical up in the Okanagan, but you guys are sort of spoiled down here and have much richer soils. I did make some comments on sort of the final volume or yield of your free run or pressings juice if you do end up pressing or processing your fruit yourselves. It's not that it's going to impact your wine quality, but part of winemaking is, yes, making a great wine, but also making as much of the great wine as you can and minimizing waste. So it is nice to have a feel for how many liters per ton or how many liters per kilo did we end up getting. And then it also just helps you budget and plan for down the road of, oh, I actually could get away with just 1 kilo of nutrient because I only ended up getting 500 liters per ton of this particular variety. Once you have your baseline analysis, the juice is ready to go, it's been racked. Now you get to make the really fun decisions of what yeast are you going to add. And hopefully you've already thought about it. Yeast choice along with turbidity and fermentation temperature and enzymes is the most critical thing you can do to drive a certain aromatic profile in white wines. So I printed out 2 different style guides. The first is Aromatic White Wines, but referring more to the Muscats, the Rieslings, the Pinot Gris, the Gewürztraminers. Those are all really high terpene varietals. So their aromatics, the linalool, the geranials, they are located in the skins, but they are also available as precursors in non-volatile form, so they're not smelly or fragrant yet until enzymatic activity by a yeast basically unlocks them and makes them aromatic and makes them volatile. Certain yeast strains have more of this enzymatic activity than other yeast strains. So it does make a big difference. So some of my favorite aromatic yeasts are highlighted here. For Riesling, for Gewürztraminer, for Muscat, for Bacchus, for Ortega, W15 is a wonderful all-around fermenter. It has modest nutrient needs, as well as the Alchemy ones, and then Alchemy 2 as well, and then BE fruits. They are pretty low H2S producing, they're low VA producing, and they have a lot more of this enzymatic activity producing ultimately a higher concentration of these desirable terpenes in your finished wine. When you're preparing any yeast, it is recommended to use a rehydration nutrient. It's not just a sales pitch, even though I learned only in the last couple months that Lallemand actually invented the entire idea of rehydration nutrients in the wine industry. So Go Firm is their flagship product, and it was developed, I think, like in the year 2000. And it basically provides pretty negligible amounts of nitrogen, but it provides a lot of the growth factors and sterols and fatty acids that the yeast need to synthesize really healthy lipid membranes, which will in turn influence how resilient they are to a higher alcohol environment. So having a really strong yeast buildup using a rehydration nutrient gives you the best chance of those yeasts being able to tolerate the alcohol at the end and actually ferment to dryness if that's your goal. So let's just recap. So far, we've talked about, do we want to add enzyme and extract flavors from the skin? If we do, are we going to add it to our picking bins, to our press? You can also add it to the juice if it's arrived as juice. And it's better to get it in sooner rather than later because it works well at warmer temperatures. Because you're probably going to chill the juice or put it in cold storage to help clarify it. The sooner you get it in, the longer it has to work because that activity does slow down as it cools down. So it won't be completely inactive, but it will slow down. So just get it in early. Now you've clarified your juice. You've racked it into a new fermentation vessel. You've got a feel for what the sugar is, what the acids are. You've chosen your yeast. You've rehydrated with nutrient. So now what do we do during ferment just to ensure success? Because this is the most fun part of winemaking. Everything else is just babysitting and packaging. This is the magic.
Maddie, can I just just to clarify? Okay, so like I think most of us do a Yan test and everything you're talking about. I think all of us are doing TAs and everything else. So
awesome.
All that is being taken care of. But when you talk about what you just said there, you've got the must and the white grapes, and you've added your enzymes, and you kind of talk about maybe going to clarification at that point, cooling it down, and maybe trying to clear it up. And some of our grapes, Pinot Gris is like you got this much sludge.
Pinot Gris is so hard to settle.
And we want just a little bit of the goodies, as you say, but then now we're moving into the fermentation. But you'd
like to hear a little bit more about clarifying?
Well, we've gone through that cold, not stabilization as such, but you're cooling it down. But then you're going to warm it up because it's got to be warm enough for the yeast, right? So there is a period moving from that cold. I always try to get yeast in it right away because I'm always concerned about wild yeast or something going bad. But you're kind of saying that it's okay to keep it cold and fall clear, kind of take your time and then warm it up and move into that next stage.
So I think what I'm really saying is you've got options. And so that's why some of the questions are, how long might this take to settle? Are you able to keep it cold while it's settling, or do you need to get some KMS in to protect it? Once you have your yeast choice, how cold tolerant is it? Is it okay just to let I mean, it depends on your quantity. If you've got 2 carboys of juice, I would just take them out of my cold storage and let them naturally warm up over the course of the day and then pitch my yeast. But if I knew there was botrytis in the fruit or had any other concerns or just wanted to get my yeast in, then I'd throw an aquarium heater in and get them up to 12 degrees and then pitch my yeast. So you're absolutely right that the juice does need to be at a hospitable temperature for the yeast. And sorry if I sort of glossed over that transition from cold settling juice. Well, that was my 45-minute timer telling me how long I've been rambling for. I can back it up a little bit. You don't need cold to settle your juice. However, because you don't want to add too much KMS, because you don't want to inhibit the yeast later on, there's really nothing else protecting the juice from spontaneously fermenting. So yeah, we want to chill it down. Something like Pinot Gris, which is, it doesn't matter how amazing the fruit is, Pinot Gris is so annoying to settle, like huge losses on it. In addition to using an enzyme to help extract aromatics, there's some really powerful pectinases that can have a huge impact in your recovery and how well that juice settles. So our sort of flagship one is called PEC 5L. Lafort has one that's called Lafazyme CL. That would be a great one if you guys haven't tried it before. Cellartech sells it. Comes in like a little 100-gram tin and it's granular, so it's really shelf stable and lasts a long time. So it is a little expensive for that tin, but it'll last you for a few years. But getting a pectinase in early will help with that clarification and just accelerate it. And then in terms of the timing, the enzymes, like they're proteins, so they are most active at the temperatures that we are most comfortable at. But to inhibit microbial activity, we're chilling this juice down. I mean, my ideal is chilling juice down to 4 or 6 degrees. That's not always possible, but even chilling it to 12 degrees is going to make those enzymes less effective. Nevertheless, they do still work, just more slowly. So I think what I was trying to say, rather than get your juice, chill it down completely, and then chuck the enzyme in, before you go home for the night. It's like, oh, your juice is here. Just get the enzyme in, get it working. Give it longer to help settle, longer to help extract. Yeah, it'll slow down the action while it's chilling, but it'll still be helping to settle things out or helping to unlock these aromatic precursors. Then once it's settled enough that you can siphon off your clear juice or rack off your clear juice, how do you get it to the right ferment temperature? It really depends on the volume you're working with. If you're working with, 1,000-liter stainless steel tank, maybe you want to throw an electric blanket around it, and you kind of just have to keep an eye on it and see how fast it warms up and just be ready to add yeast. So I think a lot of the questions are to get you thinking about these exact things so you have a plan in place and not just, great, my juice is here, I want to add my yeast, but it's still so cold, what do I do? Or, oh, shoot, my juice is warm, but I don't have my yeast here yet, what should I do? I am a really big fan of aquarium heaters, like $20 from the pet store. I've used them on a lot of my barrel ferments when they've been struggling because they're pretty gentle, they're super portable. So I highly recommend those in a pinch. I think the last part of your question was just the role temperature plays for the yeast. And yes, we do want to use rehydration nutrients, and we do want to make sure that our juice is at a friendly temperature for the yeast, because yeast are comfortable at the same temperatures that we are comfortable. So when you're rehydrating your yeast, you don't even need a thermometer. You can just stick your finger in the water. And if it almost feels neutral, like no temperature, it's at body temperature, that's perfect for them. I would say the minimum temperature you want your juice at would be 12 degrees Celsius. And I actually would discourage you from going a lot warmer, just because whatever temperature you start out at, of course, the yeast are going to generate so much heat. And if you don't have a great means of controlling that temperature or cooling it back down, it gets out of control and gets stinky very, very quickly. So starting around 12 degrees is kind of a sweet spot for most of the yeast strains. Once you've rehydrated your yeast, actually on that note of temperature, the Go Firm is like our main rehydration nutrient, but in the last couple of years, there's a new formulation. It's called Go Firm Sterile Flash. And so you know how normally for a yeast buildup, you have like your rehydration nutrient, you have your water at this 38 degrees or 40 degrees Celsius, and you mix it up, and then you add your yeast and you let it rehydrate for 15 to 20 minutes, and then you need to add some juice, but maybe it's diluted with water because the juice is cold, and it's sort of, a 45-minute, hour, 2-hour buildup, depending on what your juice temperature is, and what the yeast package says. So Go Firm Sterile Flash is actually meant to streamline the process, and it's basically you use 15-degree water, you mix the rehydration nutrient, 15-degree water, and add your yeast, and you can add it to your tank in 15 minutes.
Wow. Oh, at 15 degrees you have your yeast.
Yeah, 15 degrees Celsius.
Does that affect the rehydration of the yeast at all?
There is, according to all of our data, no impact on the yeast viability or the fermentation kinetics. So we've been able to help wineries really focus their labor, and now instead of having someone babysit this frothy yeast buildup for hours, 15 minutes, 15 degrees Celsius water, and go.
Is there an order coming, Rick?
It's
We
pretty.
have lots of Go Firm already.
It's pretty handy. It is more expensive than the regular Go Firm, but if you guys were ever interested in trying it, we could get it to you for the basic Go Firm price, because it's pretty powerful. I'm really excited about it. Now that you've rehydrated your yeast in whatever form and added it to your tank, the babysitting role begins. And this is often where you're making a lot of decisions, and a lot of those decisions are, I'm not going to do anything yet, but I'm going to keep an eye on it because I'm not sure where this is going to go. Every single day, sorry, I've got ahead of myself a little bit. Just going back to our temperature talk and settling the juice versus inoculating the juice. While you're settling, if it takes, more than 12, 24 hours, you should be looking at your juice at least twice a day, visually looking for any signs of fermentation, like any prickling. And you also want to smell it. Are you smelling any VA, anything, any acetic acid? And if you do see any of that, you have to get your yeast in. It's time to act. It doesn't matter if it's not at the perfect temperature. It doesn't matter if it's not settled enough. You need to get the clear juice off, because once it starts rolling, you're not going to be able to clarify it at all. So if you do notice any activity, jump on it now, get the clean juice off, get your yeast in right away. And you should also monitor temperature. Even if you don't have a means to control temperature, by monitoring it carefully up front, it'll help automate the process next year, where you're like, oh, all I did was take it out of my cold storage room, and 8 hours later it was at 12 degrees. So now I can just plan, cool, I'll take it out in the morning and I'll inoculate it in the afternoon, and I'll be on my way. Once it's fermenting, I think you should do all your checks first thing in the morning, just so that if you're on the fence about something, you can follow up in the afternoon and you still have time to act, rather than checking it after your workday and discovering, ooh, something's going sideways, but I really don't want to stay up all night and babysit it, and I don't want to wake up to a surprise either. So in the mornings, check your tank temperature, check your bricks. And if you're not already doing it, I encourage you to plot it on a graph, either in Excel or just on some graph paper, because you want to look at the trend and monitor for any signs of sluggishness or slowing down, especially if you're still above 5 bricks. You really want to monitor the rate of fermentation. In addition to looking at the numbers, you want to taste and you want to smell. Are there any off aromas? Is there any VA? If so, maybe the yeast are too cold. You should try and warm it up a little bit. Is there any H2S? Okay, the yeast are probably hungry. You need to get a nutrient add in, even if you just fed it yesterday. If it's still stinky, the yeast calling out for more. And then you also need to be thinking about what type of nutrients you're going to use and when you're going to add it. So this is part of having, best laid plans, but then being responsive to what you're actually smelling and tasting. Because the yeast are alive, they're not going to behave predictably every single time. And I did include, Rick had mentioned that you guys have a wonderful nitrogen calculator for your fermentation nutrition planning. I included a much more basic version that's just to reinforce some best practices, and get everyone speaking the same language. Even before you add your yeast, you can develop your nutrition plan based on what the starting sugar level is, whether your yeast in question has a low, medium, or high nitrogen requirement, And then it makes some recommendations of what types of nutrients to use. You'll notice when a lot of yan is required, that good old Fermade K is recommended just because it does have a higher concentration of yeast assimilable nitrogen compared to something like Fermade O, which is a more complete nutrient, but it doesn't quite have the same amount of accessible nitrogen for those yeast. And then the recommended additions are after that initial 2 to 3 Brix drop. So if your juice comes in and it's 21 Brix, you're going to want to get the first Fermade K or Fermade O addition in at 19 Brix, and you're going to want to get another one in when it's 1/3 of the way through. So that's going to put you down at 14 Brix. And from there after, it's sort of as the yeast require. Do you guys use DAP or do you stick to more some DAP? Yeah, DAP's super effective. And if you have something that's really, really stinky, a little bit of DAP goes a long way. Only thing to keep in mind is just sort of take DAP off the table as an option once you get below 14 Brix. Any remaining nitrogen can just create a lot of problems later for other opportunistic bacteria. So below 15 Brix, you're going to want to stick to the Fermade Ks or the NutriStarts. And then once you get below 8 Brix, if you still have either a ferment that's slowing down and showing signs of sluggishness, or if it's still smelling pretty eggy and sulfidey, Fermade O is something that you can add even down to 3 Brix, but just do it in much smaller additions. So, between 8 and 5 Brix, I'd do maybe a 50 or 100 ppm addition. Once I get below 5 Brix, talking 25 to 50 ppm with a really good stir, and relying more on stirring and temperature to keep those yeast going. And the Fermade O is equal parts to give them a little bit of a feed and also to sponge up any toxins that might be inhibiting the yeast activity as well. Those are,
Maddie,
yes.
what is the stimula Chardonnay?
Excellent question. So the stimula range of nutrients are fairly new, and they are complex nutrients. So they're inorganic nitrogen sources, or they're organic nitrogen sources. So they're derived from yeast cell walls. But they also have other minerals and micronutrients that encourage different metabolic pathways in the yeast during fermentation. So the Stimula Sauvignon Blanc actually helps encourage thiol production, and there are measurably higher concentrations of thiols in the finished wines that were supplemented with Stimula Sauvignon Blanc compared to just regular Fermade K. So there's a few different varietal specific nutrients. Stimula Sauvignon Blanc is good for not just aromatic white wines, it's actually really, really nice on Syrah as well. And then Pinot Noir helps encourage sort of a freshness and a fruitiness. So you can think of them as kind of like designer nutrients. They are extra enriched and extra expensive. And
those in addition to Fermade.
You would add them instead of. Yeah. Yeah.
When you say they're more expensive, like are you talking double, triple, quadruple? Yep. Yes.
Yeah, like double. Yeah, but I would use them on my premium wines. But they're also super shelf stable too. So I mean, a bag would last you a long time.
Can I take you back to enzymes?
Sure.
I've got a basic Scott Labs enzyme that I use periodically, and you mix up enough for the batch you've got. Mm-hmm. It turns out to be like 10 milliliters. You squirt it on 200 pounds of grapes. Mm-hmm. And what does that stuff actually do? Does it stay with the skins after it's crushed, or does all the action take place right there and then when you squirt it on them? Put it on the grapes?
It starts working on contact, but it continues to work. So it's not like a fining agent where, I've added some gelatin and it's bound up with tannins, and now that action site is, no longer active because it's bound to something else. The enzymes are hydrolyzing or cleaving different compounds, whether they're pectinases or hemicellulases or beta glucosidases, and they'll continue to work on as much substrate as they can until they're deactivated either by temperature, KMS, or bentonite is the big one that deactivates enzymes. Everybody says, oh, careful with adding your KMS. You can add like over 50 ppm KMS, your enzyme will still work. If you add any bentonite, it's gonna, enzymes are proteins, it's gonna find them right out. So just keep that in mind. Adding it to the fruit versus adding it to the press pan. For an enzyme that is designed to aid in aromatic extraction, I do like adding it to the picking bins or adding it to the press. Yes, some of it might get soaked up into the stems, but the longer contact time you have, the more you can extract. Something that is more to help clarify or settle the juice, so that would be PEC5L or Lapazyme CL. Those, there's no point adding it to whole fruit or adding it to your stems. Add it to the press pan or add it to your carboy or tank of juice already, just to minimize wastage.
Yeah, as an adjunct to that, what's the difference between a crush and a direct press, which is quite popular now, is direct press into grapes?
So, oh, okay. Yeah, there's a few different reasons you might want to do something whole cluster versus destemmed and crushed. And actually, aromatic white wines are a great case study in why you might choose something different. And also, if you refer to your very first questions, when you're asking yourself, is this hand picked or machine picked? What press cycle will we use? This is all, are you going to crush and destem the fruit? If it is whole cluster, so something like Riesling or Viognier is actually wonderful if you press it whole cluster. You get clearer juice if it's whole cluster, so lower solids, and some believe it's overall higher quality free run if you do whole cluster pressing. If it's a smoky year, you extract less from the stems because they're not macerating in a bin or in a press. And as unsexy as it is a winemaking quality consideration. However, for something like Sauvignon Blanc, because a lot of those precursors are in the skins and the skins alone, machine picked or destemmed and crushed is actually better and going to increase your thiol concentration in the wine. So it's not that one method is always better or one size fits all. It sometimes is out of your hands. If the fruit's machine picked, okay, well, I can't do a whole cluster press. Or if I don't have a crusher destemmer, then okay, I can't do destemmed. And sometimes, unfortunately, the decision is made based on, well, I can't fit this all in my press unless I destem it, so I have to destem it. I love whole cluster pressing on Chardonnay, on Riesling, on Viognier, because Viognier is very, very difficult to press. So keeping the stems in there also helps form some channels so that the juice can actually drain out properly. Otherwise, it's kind of like snot. It's just really, sticky. But something like Sauvignon Blanc, I think, should be destemmed and crushed. And then Pinot Gris, it depends really on what style you're going for. Pinot Gris, as you know, has anthocyanins in the skin, and the juice is prone to pinking. If you do whole cluster press, because it's hand harvested, you can definitely minimize color pickup and have more control over the phenolic profile of your wine, because most people don't want a super phenolic white wine. Some do, they're interesting. But in general, Pinot Gris, we don't want it super bitter or astringent. However, there is a really cool enzyme by Erbschlow, and it's called trenaline rosé. And it does sort of the opposite of all the other enzymes we've been talking about, which have been trying to extract more, whether it's yield or whether it's aromatics. The trenaline rosé enzyme actually, it works with calcium ions in the grape skin and forms like a protective wall around the anthocyanins, so that even if the Pinot Gris is machine harvested or you load it into the press and the press broke down and now it's just sitting there soaking, it minimizes color pickup. So it's an enzyme that you can use on Pinot Gris or on red grapes that you'd like to make a rosé out of and want to have the color land in that really lovely pale spectrum, but you don't want to fine out all of your aromatics and have to use carbon or bentonite to lift some of the color. This enzyme is a really neat way to have a little bit more control. Oh, sorry. I feel like I sort of jumped all over the place and you're asking wonderful questions and I feel like I'm copping out by saying, well, it depends, but it really it really does depend what style you're going for, and that's why I thought let's talk about the decision making process and less about here's one way to make one style of one grape. I think we were going through fermentation. We talked about nutrition, and if in doubt, always trust your palate and trust your gut. If you're like, okay, this is at 5 Brix, it's had so many feeds of Fermaid K, but it still stinks. Ignore the number. Give it some food. It's hungry. Trust your palate before you trust any numbers. The number of times that I have tasted something and people are like, oh, we need to add acid. The pH is this. And I'm like, but it doesn't taste like that. And then they sample it again. They're like, oh, sorry. The sample was turbid, so our pH meter didn't read it correctly. And pH is only 3.1. I'm like, yeah, always your palate is the best tool you have. And the more you do it, the more refined it becomes. So let's assume we've got our aromatic white wine. We've got like a really happy yeast. One thing we didn't touch on in our fermentation planning is, do you want to take it completely dry or do you want to stop it with a little bit of RS? Like you can take it dry and add a little bit of sugar later if you want to balance out the acidity a little bit or just make a sweeter style, but that's not fun. Give some thought based on what you're tasting and what the acidity is doing about whether you'd like to stop ferment early and keep a little bit of that natural sugar in there. If you do want to keep a little bit of sugar in there, starting around that 5 Brix mark, you're going to start checking your ferments twice a day and check their Brix just to understand how fast it's dropping. And you can pick a number based on past experience. Say, I think I want to stop this with about 10 grams per liter residual sugar. And you have to math it out backwards. Okay, so when might I be at 10 grams? If I'm at 5 Brix a day and the next day I'm down at 3.5 Brix, okay, and the next day I'm going to be at 2.7 Brix, and just have a timeline so that you don't miss that window. And then you'll notice you'll have to start measuring the Brix with increasing frequency as you start to approach your ideal range. And while you're measuring it, you should also be tasting it to see, do I like the balance? Like, oh, I want to stop it sooner, or oh, I want to push it further. And, just have a plan in mind. You can always decide to take it all the way dry. That's the easy one. Stopping with a little bit of sugar and achieving a perfect balance that's good winemaking. So let's say you're okay. I do want to stop it with 10 grams per liter of sugar. I'm just about there. I'm not measuring RS daily, but I can kind of work backwards from the Brix if they're 10 grams per liter per Brix. So based on taste, I'm going to stop this tonight. How are you guys doing your first KMS edition after ferment? Do you like to add it immediately? Do you like to wait? What are you guys currently doing for, say, a Sauvignon Blanc or a Riesling?
Most of us use that just a flat amount at that stage, and then start to measure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what most of us do, but there must be other ways of doing it.
No, I was actually hoping that's what you would say. Some people like to wait a few days or a week after fermentation and just let the yeast settle out a little bit more, because sometimes when you add KMS, you can shock the yeast that are still living and they'll give off a really reductive, rubbery smell right at the end of ferment. It usually dissipates, but that is one thing that you could try if you notice that's happening. Maybe, okay, next time I might just wait, 3-4 days after the Brix have stopped dropping if it's dry. If you're stopping with sugar, obviously you don't have that luxury. My only advice is just hit it with KMS at a rate that counts. Don't just do 20 parts. Like if you're stopping a ferment, the idea is we want to minimize handling. You'll get the best free sulfur by doing a big addition. So ideally you'd hit it with 40 or 50 ppm, and then ideally not even have to top up ever again, except maybe a little nudge at bottling. So be bold. You're stopping with sugar. Use a lot of KMS. And then if you have any way to chill it down as well, do that at the same time. And now all of the hard part about aromatic white winemaking is done, and you can kind of breathe.
So is that KMS just going to stop the fermentation?
That, along with temperature, will stop it.
And then how do you stabilize it? Starting again.
So you'll need to maintain the KMS at a good level, but the idea of hitting it up front with a heavy dose, and especially in the aromatic varieties, except for Viognier or Gewürztraminer, which have pretty low or at least reasonable pHs, you shouldn't need to be continually topping it up. But best practice is to, after you make your addition, wait 1 day and then check your free sulfur, just because it takes a little bit of time for it to equilibrate between free and bound forms. And then you're going to do your monthly analysis. So every month you will check your free SO2 and your VA, and you will taste it, and you will confirm it's not re-fermenting, confirm that there's no mold on top of the tank, it's kept cold, and the sulfur still at a healthy level.
And when you say cold, how cold?
So for an aromatic white wine, once it's done fermentation, if I stopped it with the residual sugar, I would probably set my cooling down to 4 degrees Celsius. The reason I would do that is, I don't know, threefold. First is to just help kill the yeast. The second is to just start that natural cold stabilization process. To cold stabilize white wines, you can either get it really, really, really cold, or you can hold it kind of cold, but for a longer time. So just to kickstart that process, and then also just to maintain freshness and prevent some oxidation, because holding it cold right after ferment helps retain as much of that carbon dioxide that the yeast have generated, and that's going to protect your wine against oxidation as well. So keeping as much gas in the wine by minimizing our handling, not having to add more sulfur and mix it up, or take the lid off all of the time. Keeping that gas in there will help preserve the freshness in the aromatics. There are other products that are antimicrobial agents. So if you ever smell anything that smells like Brett, so band-aidy, horsey, kind of a vinyl-y aroma, that's produced by a particular type of yeast that is insidious, but there are some chitosan-based agents that that you can use alongside KMS, and that will inhibit Brett. It won't treat it, so if you already have it in the wine, it's not going to clean it up, but it will prevent it from getting worse. So the other thing to think about too is malolactic bacteria, and whether you want your wine to go through MLF. For an aromatic white wine, not that it's not done, it's just probably not the most commercial style, but certainly malolactic bacteria can be a really powerful tool for adding texture, as well as even deacidifying, because there's some very healthy crispy acids on the island. So most of the malolactic bacteria that you would buy from Celotex or Scott Labs is the Enococcus strain. There's actually a new malobacteria just released last year. It's called ML Prime, and it's a completely different strain. It's Lactobacillus plantarum. It's really, really cool because unlike the Enococcus enis, it lacks the metabolism to convert sugar into volatile acidity. So you could throw it in your ferment 24 hours after your yeast, and even with all of that sugar there, it will not convert it into acetic acid. It lacks the mechanism to do that. It also does not convert citric into diacetyl. So it'll chip away at your malic acid, but aromatically be very, very neutral. So I think of it as like the DV10 of bacteria, because it's clean, it's strong, can handle alcohol, it's effective, and it's very, very neutral in terms of your aroma and palate. It actually would be a really neat thing to keep in mind if you do get some aromatic white juice that has a higher malic acid level, but you don't want to have to do a double salt deacidification, but the acid is a little bit out of balance. You can taste it. It's that malic acid is that really green apple hard acid. The ML prime bacteria, they make it really easy to add. It's packaged different than the Enococcus bacteria as well. So the Enococcus bacteria, similar to the yeast strains, you have to do kind of like a big buildup, get a healthy culture, and add it. The ML prime bacteria, the lactobacillus, it's like 50 times the number of colony forming units in a package that you would get for any other bacteria. And the dosage rate will only degrade 3 grams per liter of malic. So, and then it will stop, it will self inhibit. So you can do a partial malolactic fermentation and just take a little bit of acid out. If you've got more than 3 grams and you want to get rid of it all, the math is super easy. Just double your dose or 1.5 times your dose. And then it's inhibited by lactic acid. So it just kind of shuts itself down after.
What's its tolerance to SO2?
Similar to Enococcus eni. So you need to have it. You need to have your totals below 50 ppm.
If you keep talking about KMS, is that sulfite that you're talking about?
Sorry, yes, that's potassium metabisulfite.
Yeah. Okay.
PMS, you might know it as well. But
Fine. Well, I didn't check.
sorry, my shorthand.
Now, does that come in liquid form or is it a powder?
It's a dried bacteria. It's not only handy for deacidifying, because it is pretty alcohol tolerant. You can use it on your reds. I know I usually like to let a lot of my reds just go through MLF on their own, and even like spring mallow in my pinots. But if any of them get stuck or are sluggish, it can be really hard to get them through once the alcohols are up at 13, 14, even 15% in the Okanagan. The ML Prime is a little bit of a silver bullet because it can come in and finish the job. It's pretty robust. So it is very exciting innovation.
You mentioned pH and the yeast choice.
Yes.
We have high acids and we use 71B very often to get rid of that.
Yeah, 71B degrades some malic acid as well.
Yeah, I just wonder if there are more yeasts that will do this and perhaps better.
Yes, there are, and I've brought a few copies of the handbook. I don't have enough for everyone, and you're going to be disappointed with what I'm about to say. So there's our yeast charts, which are nice for choosing based on varietal, like a good Chardonnay yeast, or if you want an aromatic white yeast. And then it gives information about the alcohol tolerance, the YAN requirements, what temperatures it ferments at. And then our book refers to yeasts that degrade malic acid and says refer to the chart, but there's no actual column of yeasts that do degrade malic acid. But on our website, we have a cheat sheet, so I can send that to you. There is more than 71B. I think Opal and ICVOK also degrade some malic acid.
It's also on my spreadsheet.
Is either your data or your spreadsheet quantifiable in terms of how much of an acid reduction you can expect from a fermentation?
From the yeast?
Yes.
It depends. I know I've said that a lot. It depends on the temperature, on the nutrient status of the juice. Unfortunately, it's not as black and white where we can say 71B will always decrease your malic acid by 0.5 grams per liter, because it's going to perform differently in a juice that started at 24 Brix and 18 degrees Celsius than it is in a juice that's only 20 Brix and much colder. But it does give a range. I think it depletes anywhere from 0.5 up to like 1.1 grams per liter of malic acid. Yeah, it can do, I think up to 1.1 under ideal circumstances. But
Island grapes, as you've already mentioned, they're fairly crisp and acid.
That's why they're so good.
Talking to winemakers, a lot of that is malic, higher malic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to throw 71B in there, which the literature says 20 to 40%
Mm-hmm.
of malic. And then I'm thinking, what I really want in my aromatic white is a yeast that will cleave aroma. Aromas. So can you throw 71B in and a 2A23? Or will they neutralize each other?
They won't neutralize each other. It's not a very common co-inoculation. 71B is pretty dominant. I'd have to double check its kill factor status. Wouldn't be something that I would encourage necessarily. I would be more inclined to either use the yeast that will push the aromatics and then use ml prime or deacidify to dial in my acid rather than try and have the yeast compete for nutrients. I do love QA23 and VL2 together. That's pretty classic co-inoculation and does seem to have an amplifying effect on the aromatics compared to using each one on its own.
Just, in the same vein, I guess, cold stabilization. A lot of us don't have access to cold temperatures. And so
use CMC.
When we get cold winter, that's great. It's outside. But there's also products I really love, CMC,
Yeah.
APA,
Huge fan of CMC, carboxy methylcellulase. Lafor's version of it is CellStab. Our version, I can't remember. I have to double check, but it's a flat rate regardless of how cold unstable your wine is. It's 1 mil per liter, 1 mil per hectoliter, depending on the product, and it will cold stabilize it indefinitely.
You have to know something about the protein content in the wine before you use it.
The wine has to be protein stable, and it can't just be borderline protein stable. It has to be slam dunk protein stable. So the measurement or the spec for that would be the change in NTU after it's been heated to 80 degrees Celsius for 4 hours needs to be less than 2 of those turbidity units. You can do that visually. So the human eye, just to give you some context, anything that looks clear, like if you take a glass of water from the sink, is probably 3 NTU or lower. Above 3 NTU starts to look a little bit cloudy or hazy. So if your wine looks clear, your water looks clear, you can feel confident that's about 3 NTU. So even doing a basic heat stability test at home by putting it in a water bath in your oven for however many hours and then letting it cool down on the counter, if you don't see any flocculation or any haze forming, even visually you can feel pretty good that it's pretty close to stable, if not guaranteed stable. So you don't need the turbidity meter to do it necessarily. But yes, it does need to be completely protein stable. Anything that is borderline, so I've had wines that were protein stable, but instead of being, delta NTU was 0.2, it was more like 1.8, so kind of pretty close to the spec of 2. And then adding CMC, and you have to check the wine afterwards as well to confirm the cold stability and the heat stability. It pushed it out of heat stability. Just because there's a ton of colloid interactions going on and it's just been filtered and the matrix is very disrupted. So yes, ensuring heat stability prior to adding CMC is essential. It really should be your very last addition before bottling. So, get your sugar in or if you're adding any tannin, get your KMS add, get all of that in, and then it's pretty much one of the last things you add before you bottle. And you do need to give it about 48 to 72 hours before you attempt to filter it, if you are going to filter it, because it will gum up your filters pretty quickly too. But yes, CMC is an absolute game changer. There are many wineries that do not have any, like commercial scale wineries that don't have any heating or cooling, and to be able to just add a product and know my wine is cold stable, I can bottle next week without having to spend a fortune on refrigeration and cream of tartar, which is like $7 per kilo, and you need to use, anywhere from 0.6 to 3 grams per liter for 100,000 liters. CMC is a silver bullet. The only thing you can't use it on is rosés. So I have used it on rosés, but it can cause color instability. So if you do have a rosé that you want to cold stabilize, because the tartrates in rosé never look nice, they're like those long sheets instead of just the little glass shards at the bottom. You can add CMC, but if you do, I encourage you to mock it up first. Just grab a sample, add your CMC on the bench top, and then throw it in your freezer overnight. Take it out in the morning, and that will give you sort of the worst case scenario. So if we added CMC to this rosé and it went out to the market and someone put it in their freezer and forgot about it, is it going to lose a ton of color? Is it going to drop out? And is it going to be cold unstable as well? And then it would just be a gut feel of like, oh, a little bit dropped out, but I can live with it. Like side by side with the parent tank, it's actually not that noticeable. So, yeah.
The newer one,
KPA, yeah, KPA works a little bit differently. The CMC works basically by performing a protective barrier around the bitartrate crystals so that they cannot continue to aggregate. The KPA kind of accelerates this like acidic aggregation. I feel like I've gone completely off topic, but I'm really loving the questions, and I wanted there to just be Q&As at the end. The only thing I was going to do was not to walk through painfully the style guides, but just sort of to highlight a couple things that I think would be really valuable for Vancouver Island grapes. There's some really, really gorgeous Bacchus, Ortega, Cigarebe, like Pinot Gris, and Sauvignon Blanc as well. So just to call out a few specific things that might be worth thinking about for the upcoming harvest, an enzyme that will help sort of unlock a lot of those aromatic precursors is the Lauzyme Cuvée Blanc or the Scottzyme Sin-Free. It's a little less concentrated, but it's such a great all-rounder. You can use it on any of your whites. It's really versatile, and it helps with clarifying as well. So with the Sin-Free, you get kind of a 2-for-1 action. Then for settling, the Rapidase Clear Extreme or the PEC5L are the two most potent pectinases that we have. The Rapidase Clear Extreme is really helpful if you have really, really cold juice. So if you're making an ice wine, this can definitely help with settling. It's also a little bit more concentrated, so some stubborn Pinot Gris would benefit from the Rapidase Clear Extreme. For fining, I did bring a few fining samples just because there's no better way to see the impact than just to taste for yourself. So you can mock them up on wines or juices and see, get a feel for how they might impact your juices. And then for yeast, again, Riesling, Pinot Gris, and Muscat, W15 is a wonderful and resilient and sort of easy low H2S yeast. And then Sauvi or Bee Fruits or the Alchemies are wonderful Sauvignon Blanc or Ortega or Bacchus yeast because they really drive more of that thiol, passion fruit, boxwood profile. And then lastly, the nutrients. You can try the Stimulus Sauvignon Blancs if you're feeling really, really bougie, but Vermedo, I think, is just as good for all intents and purposes. But don't tell Lalaman that I said that. I think you've heard me ramble on long enough. Are there?
I just have a question on the packaging of the ML. You use wine in small amounts sometimes, 5 and 6 gallon carboy. How is it sold?
I think it's sold to treat 25 hectoliters of wine is our smallest format, but it is shelved.
A little bit on a chopstick, put it in the carboy.
Yeah, yeah.
Does it have to be kept frozen?
No.
No.
Once it's open, just tape it up and put it back in the fridge. Yeah. Sorry, the last comment. The other thing you have for aromatic whites, I know we focused mostly on fermentation, but there is one last enzyme that you can only use after fermentation. The Lafor's is Lafazyme Arome. We have a very bad saleswoman. Our version is Rapidase Arome. Sorry, I'm just looking for my own notes here. Rapidase Revelation Aroma, or the Lauzyme MMX. They are not pectinases, they are beta glucosidases. And so that makes a lot of the terpene compounds more volatile and aromatic and available. However, beta glucosidases are inhibited by sugar. So you can't add them to your juice. You can't add them during ferment. You need to add them once your residual sugar is below 25 grams per liter. And that's why the easiest thing to do is just kind of add them right at the end of ferment. It's okay to add them shortly after or shortly before you sulfur, but you do want to get them in before you start to heat stabilize your wine because, of course, that bento will deactivate them. yeah, that's one final special consideration for aromatic whites.
Any other questions for Maddie?
You can talk longer than 10 minutes.
You let me yammer on all night. I feel so bad, but I really enjoyed all of the questions. You're making me think a lot.
We don't feel bad. We feel privileged. Thank you very much, Maddie. Oops, sorry. A little token of our appreciation.
Oh, thank you very much.
I've got a little Saint Emilion Grand Cru there for you.
Ooh.
So I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you very much. This is so kind. I really hope this wasn't too basic. You guys have all been making wine a lot longer than I have. And I also didn't want it to just, I don't know, I didn't want it to be a sales pitch. I mean, you can find a lot of information about products on our website. I'm always happy to answer questions, but I really like to empower our conversations so that we're all thinking the same way.